I'm going to be talking about V-brakes. We've had a couple of requests about people wanting a bit of assistance in fitting some new cables. So I thought V-brakes are quite a popular braking system, so why not address that first? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The tools that you'll need to take part are as follows. And some of the equipment that you may need regarding cables, pads, things like that are also as follows. Pause those images, by the way, if you need to have a look at them, and I can go through what tools and things are there as the video progresses. So I won't be using all of the tools, but some of the braking systems you guys might be slightly different. So where I have an Allen key on this bike, you might have a 10mm spanner, that sort of thing. So that's why I've put some different bits and bobs, a bit of variation on the tools there. So I've got a bike here that's got a V-brake system fitted to it, which we could just see, I'm sure. If I lift the bike up, I'll get it in shot. There we go. So V-brake system is quite simple. Basically you have a cable that attaches to a lever here, runs down and is bolted through one arm into the other arm, so that when you pull the brake, it pulls the levers together and puts the pads onto the rim. Very simple but very effective braking system. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at replacing the cable, but also we're going to look at replacing the pads. A lot of the time the pads tend to wear out before the cable does. But I always think that if you put new pads on, it's well worth putting a new cable on too, because you have an adjuster here that allows you to tension the cable up as the pads wear. So if the pads have weared down and people have been using the adjuster as they should have done, then the chances are there'll be no adjustment left on that cable anyway, so it's probably worth just putting new pads on it as well while you're here and sticking the cable in. So we're going to disconnect this system now. We're going to remove the cable, we're going to remove the pads, we're going to put some new pads on, we're going to put a new cable in. I'll show you how that's done. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to use an Allen key. On this one it's a 5mm Allen key, and that slackens off this arm here where the bolt is, and you'll see the cable just releases there. You can see that brake there has dropped right away from the wheel like that. So what we can do now, you can use some cable cutters. If you've got cable cutters, brilliant, because they tend to cut the cable nice and tidy. They kind of cut around rather than squash like cycles or pliers do. But I appreciate not everybody has a pair of cable cutters, and I do try and make these videos as simple as possible, utilising the tools that you might have access to. So if you need to, you can use a pair of side cutters or a pair of pliers as well. I've got some cable cutters, I'm going to use those. So I'm going to nip that end off there. I'm going to pull that through. Now you get a little boot. I'll show the camera as I take these parts off. So you get a little boot, a little rubber boot, and you get what's called a noodle, a V-brake noodle. So you need to keep those. Then on the lever here, there's a bit of variation with levers, but a lot of the time you'll have a line that goes through the lever here, like a gap, and you'll have the same that you can find on the adjuster. So as you wind the adjuster around, you just basically align all the lines up, and then once all the lines are lined up, the cable will pull like this, and it'll pull out. Again, there's a little groove in the bottom of the lever there, so that will allow you to drop the cable out and just put the cable to one side. Some of you guys might have a slightly different lever, as I've mentioned, where there isn't a groove but there's a little gap underneath. So if you just take your time, have a look at it, you'll be able to work out roughly how the cable comes out. And the full thing should come off like that, with the inner and the outer. So you've got the outer there, which is the black piece, and you've got the inner there that basically does all the work and pulls in and out, in and out, in and out, and pulls the brake on and off. So I'm going to take the V-brake pads off. There's a little tip here for you. When you buy the V-brake pads, like this, they'll come with all the spacers and things in the correct order. Your bike should have them in the correct order, unless someone's made a mistake and put them on incorrectly. So it's worth having a look and just comparing them, because you know then which way these will go, so you'll be able to see where they align on your bike. And just a little tip, just do one at a time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slacken that off with an Allen key. Again, sometimes they have nuts on these. 5 or a 6 Allen key, and sometimes a little 10mm nut. I'm going to take that one off. Let's just say that one's worn out. So I've left one pad on because I can see that one is fitted correctly according to my pad that I have here. Now if the camera can see, what you have here is you have two what I call the gold washers in the middle. Sometimes they're slightly silver, I think, well, those have got slightly more silver than gold. But you'll see they're like tapered, so they're like rounded. And the idea is that you separate those two there like that. And where my fingers are, where that gap is where the brake arm would be. And those tapered washers just allow a little bit of adjustment as you tighten it up. So what I've done is I've got a little V-brake arm here that I've removed from my bike that I can show you how to fit the pads to. So if we take the two gold washers, we're going to remove everything that goes with the first one and leave on the second one. Now, there's a knack to this, not drop them all over the floor again, which is why it's a good idea just to use one at a time, because then you can have a look and see which ones, if you have dropped them, which way they go around. So you can see what's left on there. You've got the bowl, if you like, and the tapered washer, and that will go onto your brake arm like so. So you can see there that there's adjustment on the pad now. The pad can rotate, and then you put all the rest of the stuff back on. So you'll then be left with the tapered washer, the little bowl, a little washer, and then your nut to hold it all on. As you see there, because it's all tapered, it allows the pad to move back and forth as it's tightened. So as you tighten that up, you can put that pad where you want it to, and it'll allow it to sort of move on an angle if it needs to align up with your wheel. The only difference sometimes, which is why I'm telling you have a look at your own bikes, is that the washers that you can see where you've got back on the bowl, you've got the big bowl and the little bowl, sometimes they switch places, and that's because the wheel might be wider or narrower. So that you're trying to keep your arms as straight up as you can. So if you've got a really wide wheel and your arms are like this, you don't want that. You want them still nice and square like that. So you can swap the bowls around, if you will, to make the arms go in a little bit closer and keep them square for the wider rim. But a lot of the time it is just literally the way they come on the pads. So like I've just shown you there, I'm going to fit the pads. I'm going to leave the washer and I'm going to take the bowl with me. So just for clarity again, I'm leaving the tapered washer and the larger bowl on that side, and I'm going to put that on the pad, the pad on the arm. And I'm going to put all that stuff back on again. If you can keep it all together like I do with my fingers, it's a brilliant way of doing it. But as I say, if you do drop it on the floor, you've got another brand new pad with them all in the correct order, and you've got one on the other side still. So once you've got that on, you want to hold it against the wheel rim. Difficult to see because everything's black, I appreciate, but what I'm doing is I'm aligning the brake block with the wheel. I'm keeping it nice and flat. The pad's still quite loose. I'm keeping it nice and flat, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to nip that pad up a little bit there like that. So the pad's nice and flat. It's not catching the tyre. It's not hanging off the bottom of the rim. It's nice and flat against the rim, and I know that when that goes back and forth like that, that's going to make a nice connection on the wheel and slow us down. So the same goes for the other side. I'm going to slacken that bolt off. We know that that's correct because I've just fitted the other side in the same way that this one was. So this one was fitted correctly as well. But again, I'm going to put a new pad on. I'm going to separate those two washers again. And that's going to go like that. Start on there. There we go. And again, I'm just offering that pad up to the wheel, keeping it nice and flat, nice and square against the rim. I'm just going to give that little nip up. I'm not going to leave those as slack as they are at the moment. I'm just going to nip those now because I might still need to make a slight adjustment with those as well. So in your parts that I said you may need, you will need an inner cable. There are different cables, not all cables are the same. So this is a brake cable for like a mountain bike or a BMX. A road bike one is slightly different. It's more like a barrel with two separate barrels on top of each other, which I can show you at the end of the video. And a gear cable looks very, very similar, but only has the one barrel, so just be careful. They are different sizes. Brake cables are 5mm, gear cables are 4. So you need to make sure you get the right one. So something like this, they're about 75 pence to £1 for somewhere like Wilkinson's or something like that, and it'll be more than efficient for what you need. So we're going to pop this in to the lever first. Now before I do this, what I'm going to do is set this adjuster halfway out. So it's not going to be all the way in, it's not going to be all the way out, it's going to be halfway. And I can do that by looking at the top and seeing how much is in the lever. And I'm going to unscrew it and then just lock it off, keeping those grooves in alignment. And the reason I've done that is because if you imagine this was a customer's bike, you don't necessarily know how the customer prefers their bike. They may want it really, really tight, or they might want it quite slack with a lot of modulation. So you want to leave a little bit of adjustment in there. Also, if I do the brake a little bit too tight, I can knock the adjustment off. You don't want to have the brake set with the adjuster right out, because as I mentioned earlier, as the brake pads wear, there wants to be a little bit of adjustment there to allow you to adjust up to make the lever nice and tight again as the pads go down. So if you wind that all the way out, there's no adjustment left. So it's well worth having it halfway and then do the brake tight and then just nip it off slightly and then you adjust it to get the modulation. If it's your own bike, you'll adjust it to how you feel, but you don't want the levers to be coming back and hitting the handlebars like this. There needs to be a lot of clearance there. So we're going to pop this in the groove at the bottom and we're going to spin that round, and to stop that all falling out, I'm just going to move that locking up round so the grooves no longer line up, and because the grooves no longer line up, the cable won't fall out, so it gives us something to work with. The outer cable, check it for damage, make sure that it's not kinked over too much, that it hasn't been caught in something and there's a bit of water going, because you'll see a bit of rust inside there, and if that's the case you'll need to make a new one. You get them in usually a pretty decent length, maybe you'll get like a front and a rear, again a couple of pounds from somewhere like Wilkinson's, and just copy off your old one, just make one fit your old the same. Some of them have little metal ends on them and some of them don't. If they do, try and get yours off. Sometimes they're a little bit to squeeze on with some pliers, you can pop them off, or you can actually buy little pots of them that you can make your own cables, but that's quite extreme if you're only running one bike to have 100 brake ferrules that you only need 4 of. So if you can get them off, this one actually lets you take them off. So you can make a new cable if you want to. Again, as I say, just copy off your old one, same length, cut it. If you've got a pair of these, they cut really easily. If you haven't, you can cut them with side cutters or pliers, or I have seen people use like a junior hacksaw, because you can cut straight through, because if you cut it with these, you squash it over and there's another sleeve inside there that you'll have to open back up again if you cut it with these, because you will squash it down. So again, if you can use a little junior hacksaw or something like that, that'll make a nice clean cut for you. The noodle I mentioned earlier, this is a metal noodle with a little plastic liner, and what I tend to do, just to make sure that everything's running nice and smooth, because it can get a little bit dry in there, I tend to just put a little bit of lubricant through there. So this is GT85, again, depending on where you get it from, it's about £3 to £5, and you can get another one called TF2, and Wilkinson's do their own brand, and Boys do a version of it, and you're looking for like some sort of Teflon lubricant, something like that. And I'm just going to put a little bit down there just to make sure that the cable's nice and free. So I've got my outer, there's nothing wrong with mine, so I'm going to reuse it again, and I'm going to pop it through like that into the lever. I'm going to make sure, it's up to you where you want this cable to run. If you want it to run around the back of the others, that's fine, but what you want to be doing is making sure that when that cable's on and the bars turn, that it's nice and free. It's even more important with your rear cable, because your rear cable has further travel and it has to flex because it moves with the handlebars. So it's just making sure that things aren't tangled. There's a reflector there, so I'm going to make sure that it's not hooked under there, because I don't want that. I want it to be nice and free. And I'm just going to pop a loop in that just so that doesn't fall off in the meantime. And that'll stay on for me. So I'm going to just double check my brake pads. Again, I'm looking to make sure that they're nice and square on the rim, they're not catching the tyre, and they're not falling off and hitting the spokes. I'm happy with that. So then I'm going to get that noodle I mentioned. The noodle like that. So the metal ends that I've mentioned on the cable, sometimes it doesn't have one because it uses that as one, so you don't have to worry too much about it, but if you can get them off, it's worth taking them off. And I'm going to thread that through, and you can see the cable sits in the fat end and the sort of barrel end sits in this metal thing on the V-brake arm itself. So I'm going to feed that up there like that. I'm going to click that into there. So you can see now that there is actually going to be pulling that right hand arm from where I am, right hand arm. Little rubber boot. Again, that just stops the dirt getting into here, but it does also stop the water from getting out that gets in the top. So it's kind of 50-50 whether you want to put it on, but I always do. I think it looks much neater with it on. So again, it's got a fat end and a thin end. So the fat end goes towards this larger bit, and the thin end actually goes onto this cable, stop the water going back up. So I'm going to pop that on there too. And then I'm going to get my Allen key, 5 Allen key. I'm going to pop the cable back where it came from. Again, if you are doing this for the first time, it doesn't hurt to take a few photographs of where things are. So on this, it's quite obvious where the cable goes, but sometimes it might have a nut that's got a hole in it, goes through, and you don't know whether it goes behind the arm or in front of the arm. So have a look. Failing that, you can always think, oh, what have I done here? And you can have a look at the back one, because the back one should be the same setup. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use my left hand to push the arm towards the wheel. And at the same time, I'm going to grip the cable. Now there's a technique to that, it is quite difficult. So if you need someone to give you a hand with it, then do so. But as I'm pulling that cable, you can see it's pulling that other arm in. So I don't even have to touch that arm, I'm just touching this left-hand arm. So I'm going to touch them on the back, on the rim, so that it's like the brake's on there. And I'm going to back it off very slightly. And I'm going to tighten that up. Again, I'm just going to nip it up. It's only a small nut, so you don't have to go mental with it. There is a torque setting for it if you had that equipment, but again, I'm keeping these things simple, so I'm not messing up with torque settings at the moment. So now I can just try that. And that's a really nice brake. If I wanted it to be a little bit tighter, I could, but I'd be very happy with that. You can see the movement on the lever there. It's not coming anywhere near there. There's still a little bit of adjustment on there as well if I wanted to bring it a little bit tighter. And if I wanted to slacken it off a little bit, especially if it was a child's bike, I could wind that in a little bit. To be honest, if it was mine, I would probably want a little bit more on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull a little bit more cable through there. And that's why I didn't tighten that right up, because I don't want to squash the cable completely, because again, I might just be making a little adjustment there. So that's why I just sort of nipped it. Enough for me to just try and pull the brake and see if I was happy with the lever positioning. So I put a little bit more on there, and that's actually too much. You can see it's holding the brake on now, but remember I left some adjustment on there, so I can take that off. So I can wind that lock nut back off, and I can wind that adjuster in. So that's that adjustment right off there now. That's much better. So, one thing that we need to do, that I've noticed on this bike, is that the brake isn't quite balanced. You can see, hopefully, that this here, this left arm is doing a little bit more work than the right one. And that's because of the brake tension. There's springs inside here, which you can see on this one. There's a little spring here, and that holds onto the frame. So when you pull the brake on and off, the spring, when you leave go of the lever, the spring returns the arm to where it should be. And they're adjustable. And on this particular bike, you can see here, it hasn't quite been balanced correctly. That can be because the wheel's not quite set right, and it also can be because it's got a little bit of a buckle in the wheel too. So there's not what you can do if you have got a buckle in the wheel. All you can do is sort of get somewhere near. So to do that, what you need is a Phillips screwdriver. Sometimes it's an Allen key, sometimes it's a Phillips screwdriver. On this one, I know it's a Phillips screwdriver. And what you're doing is the arm that's doing the most work has more tension on it. So rather than just tension the other side up, just try and slacken a little bit of tension off that one first. So lefty loosey, I'm going to knock a little bit of tension off it. So I've knocked quite a lot off there, and it's still doing a lot of the work. You can just to say make out it's doing a lot of work there. So again, I'm going to put a little bit more on this one. So righty tighty, and there straight away it's dragged that arm in. It's starting to, can you see? They're both more or less moving together now. And that's quite a nice brake. I'm happy with that. So remember, I didn't tighten all the pads up. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tighten that cable just to make sure that's not going to pull through. And then I'm going to pull the brake on and just nip the pads up. Again, if you've got someone that can give you a hand with it, just get someone to pull the brake on and nip the pads. Just be careful that they don't move. You might as well get the brake to hold the pads for you rather than you trying to do it. I'm just nipping those just to make sure. And again, I'm running the wheel round just to make sure that they're not catching the tyre and that they're nice and on the square on the rim when the brake does come on. To finish it off, you've got this huge length of cable now, because this is a universal cable for front or rear. I think even if you bought a cable that was specific to a front, you'd still probably have a little bit too much. So again, I'm going to use my cable cutters. You can use side cutters if you need to. I'm going to fold that down. I'm going to bring the cable to roughly the top of where the bolt that holds the pad on. I'm going to snip that off. And the piece that's come off is no good now, unfortunately, because it has no end on it. If anyone's got a use for them, then let me know, because that would be quite interesting. Drop us a comment. But at the moment, we just have to recycle these, because as I say, there's no end on them, so you can't use them for anything. And then you may have seen in the equipment that I said that you needed a little pot that says wire end covers. Again, these are just tiny little things that stop the cable from fraying. So sometimes when you buy a cable, they'll give you a couple of wire end covers with it, and all you do is you pop it on. And for some reason I use side cutters for it. I just find it easier, and I just nip them on. I don't cut through it, I just nip them on, and I just make sure that's folded through, and that's it. If you don't get a cable end cover, you could use a little piece of electrician's tape or something like that, or drop a bob of glue on it, because it can get quite sharp that if it frays. And that's it. And the reason I've left that in is that if at some point I need to pull some cable through or adjust it or something like that, there's a little bit to work with. I've still got plenty of adjustment on this lever here, so I can still pull the cable on and pull the brake on and off quite comfortably. And then there's the pads where I can wind that adjuster in and keep the lever where it is, and just bring the pads a little bit closer to the wheel as they wear down. And that's it basically. If you were doing the rear brake, it's very similar. It's laid out in exactly the same way, albeit with a few stops along the way. So on this bike, there's a stop here where the cable goes from the lever to the frame. So you'd have to, same as with this outer cable, just make sure that's okay. And you've got another piece here that goes from the back up to the brake here. You can just see where my hand is. And again, you're just checking that those cables are free and aren't going to catch on anything. And if they are snagging or if they are dry, then just make yourself a new piece. Again, if you buy, what I would do is I would probably just buy a rear anyway, because then if you get a decent bit of length, you can probably make a few different ones out of it. I did mention some different cables, which I'll pop and get now. So there we've got another brake cable, which is for like a road type bike. So you have to make sure you get the right one. And that is a gear type cable, which not to be confused with the road type cable. So if I bring the other one in, we've got the three cable types here. So we've got the more common brake cable, which is a mountain bike, BMX, hybrid bike, that sort of thing. We've got this, which is like a barrel type one, which is for like road bikes. It's a bit smaller, so it fits more inside the more condensed levers. And this is a gear cable, which we don't use for brakes at all for obvious reasons. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been a bit clearer for you. If you do need to pause the video along the way and rewind it and listen to some bits again, then by all means do so, of course. Drop us a comment if you want to, if there's something you want us to look at, much like we've done this far, because you had some comments asking about brake cables. And as I say, you don't always have to put a cable on when you change your pads, and you don't always have to put pads on when you put a cable. The cable might break, very rarely do they break. A lot of the time they just go rusty and start to get stiff and sticky, and you change your cable for that reason. But I just find it's easier to, while you're there, put new pads on, put new cable in, it just fit and forget, it'll last a lot longer then. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. The next video I'm going to do is going to cover disc brakes, cable operated disc brakes, because it's a very, very similar procedure and they work in a similar sort of way, but it's just setting them up is a little bit more difficult than the V-brake type. So I'll do a separate video for those. So thanks for watching, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.